But I'd like to bring everyone's attention back to why we are here today. If we look at the title of this program, Monitoring and Documentation of Human Rights Violations, you are here because you are not necessarily a first responder in the humanitarian space. You're not necessarily a doctor or a politician. You are somebody who either has a legal background, journalistic background, or someone who just proactively wants to get involved in this fight against impunity. Let's remember that this is our contribution. When the guns are firing, the role of the law is minimized. We can't pretend otherwise. There's only so much we can do now. But the question I put to all of you is, do we do something or do we do nothing? The focus here today, and that's the key word, focus. Because if we stay thinking about all of the things that are happening in this crisis, we're inviting complacency. We'll be immobilized. There's so much going on. And today, now, the conversation we're about to have is about focus. Focusing in on what is actually taking place in Sudan as we speak. Because it's with that focus that we can take these next steps, not only for this afternoon, but in the coming 2 days, on what we're actually going to do about it. I have with me two people who have a lot of credibility in this space. Abdullahi Hassan, just back from Chad, has been doing a lot of field research in West Darfur for Amnesty International. He's going to tell us about his findings. I have Kholood Khair, who I think needs no introduction, who has been the voice, especially to the international community, about what is happening in your country, and has a unique perspective on what's taking place as we speak. These two individuals are going to help bring the focus that we need to take the next steps. Who should start? Abdullahi. Welcome.
Thank you so much, and greetings to everyone. First of all, I want to thank the Wayamo Foundation for hosting this event. This is the second time in, I think, 1.5 months that I'm attending two events convened by the Wayamo Foundation. I found the previous event very enlightening, and I really thank Wayamo Foundation for continuing to discuss and put the spotlight on the situation in Sudan. After that, as my friend said, my name is Abdullahi Hassan. I'm the Amnesty International researcher covering Sudan and Somalia. Previously, I used to cover Somalia, but I started covering Sudan early this year. I wanted to say that the types of violations we are seeing, and human rights violations and international humanitarian law violations we are seeing in Sudan is generally the same, whether it is in Khartoum or whether it is in Darfur or whether it is in other parts of the country. Darfur and West Darfur particularly have a different dimension that I'm going to talk about. Generally, Amnesty International has been documenting human rights and international humanitarian law violations related to this ongoing conflict since April 15th. And I have to say from the beginning that we have not published our research findings yet. We are going to issue a comprehensive report covering both Khartoum and Darfur, and specifically West Darfur, on the 3rd of August. What I'm going to share here is key general findings that are going to be highlighted in that report, And we will invite journalists and other individuals who are interested in Sudan when we launch the report. Okay. Okay. So with regards to the types of violations we managed to find so far all over Sudan, the first one is what we are calling deliberate attacks on civilians. I will hone in on West Darfur briefly, but I wanted to highlight first of all that this is happening in a context where people are getting killed either in their homes, in the streets, in places where they are seeking safety, or sometimes when they are fleeing the conflict, particularly of civilians fleeing from Janina to Chad. They were getting attacked on their way to Adre when they were flying to Adre, or to, fleeing to Adre or to other parts of Chad. We placed sexual violence against women and girls under this category, which is the deliberate targeting of civilians. All the violations we have documented both in Khartoum and in Darfur relating to deliberate targeting of civilians amount to war crimes. And now I will cover West Darfur because that is what I was asked to focus on. Myself and another colleague from Amnesty International have been in Adre for 9 days in June. And we have been able to interview people who fled from Janina and other parts of West Darfur. I want to start by saying that the fighting in West Darfur particularly is happening in a context where there was already ongoing tension between communities in West Darfur. What we have found is that in most cases, in most of the towns where we were able to interview people, there was fighting between the RSF and Arab militia on one side and Masalit armed groups who are a combination of self-defense groups and some somehow official groups like the Sudanese Alliance who are fighting in some town, in most of the towns we were able to cover. In most cases, the Masalit armed group and the Sudanese Alliance were overrun, and the RSF and Arab militia followed up with targeting of Masalit men and older boys. So the deliberate targeting of civilians we spoke. Sorry, I wanted to say before I go back to the deliberate targeting, the other violations we documented across Sudan is also people who are caught in the crossfire, people who are getting killed or injured because of the ongoing fighting between the RSF and SAF in Khartoum, and between armed fighters allied to the RSF and Arab militia and armed fighters allied to the Masalit groups. The third one is looting and destruction of civilian infrastructure, and both in Khartoum and in West Darfur. And the last one is co-location of RSF forces in civilian densely populated areas. Those are the four key violations we were able to. The fourth one is co-location of RSF fighters in heavily populated areas, both particularly in Khartoum, and we have also seen that in Darfur. Going back to the context of West Darfur, then this we go back to the deliberate targeting of civilians, which is really worrying. Our findings show that RSF and armed and allied Arab militia have been engaged in some fighting with the Masalit armed groups, and after overrunning them, have been targeting Masalit men and older boys. I repeat again, Masalit, because All the people we interviewed in Adre and in East Chad were all of them from the Masalit community. And all the violations, all the people who were killed or injured, apart from one case, all of them were from the Masalit community. All the people who were killed or injured that we were able to document were against the Masalit community. So all the boys and men were targeted in their homes. So the RSF and the Arab militia will go to homes and execute men and all the boys in their homes, in the streets if they find them running, or in places where they sought safety, for example, in schools. And that was widespread across all the towns. Both, we covered 3 towns. One is Al Janina, the other one is Mistere, and the other one is Tendelti. In all those 3 towns, the patterns were the same. I want to give 1 or 2 examples because I don't want to go into all the details. For example, in Al Janina, on 14th of May, a doctor and 15 other men were executed in a hospital by RSF and Arab militia. This doctor was treating patients in his clinic, and then the RSF and the Arab militia came and executed himself and all the people who he was treating. It was not clear to us whether the people he was treating were civilians or armed fighters who got wounded and he was treating them. But in any case, those were protected people and they should not have been killed. In the town of Mestere, that HRW covered and the designated expert referred to in his statement, we were able to, on 28th of May, we were able to document the case of 5 brothers, including a 13-year-old boy, who are all executed in their home, following fighting between the RSF, Arab militia, and the Masalit self-defense groups. These men were staying in their house, and the RSF came and executed them in their own home. In the town of Tendelti, I'm covering all of the 3 towns. On 17th of May, a man was killed, and his brother was injured in the market of Tendelti, and more than 7 other men were also killed in Tendelti that same day, all by the RSF and Arab militia. So that is, this resulted, we also know the killing of the governor of West Darfur in captivity, which we also documented, and this led to an influx of people fleeing Al Janina and other parts of West Darfur to come to Adre. We have met with many people who were attacked on their way to Adre, including men, women, and and girls. They were some of them were killed, some were injured, and some were robbed of their property. So that's generally in relation to the deliberate attacks and deliberate targeting of Masalit men and all the boys that we have documented in West Darfur. In relation to people who are caught in the crossfire, which is essentially indiscriminate use of indiscriminate weapons in densely populated areas, weapons that have wide area effects, including rockets that should not be used in a civilian populated setting. This has led to the death and injuries of many people in West Darfur. People were killed and injured in their homes. People were killed and injured in places where they sought safety, for example, in IDP camps, in schools, in the Ministry of Agriculture in El Janina. And many people were hit by stray bullets. And we interviewed dozens of people who had bullet wounds from stray bullets. In most cases, Amnesty International was not able to identify which group was firing those weapons that led to the killings and injuries in the cases we documented. In relation to looting, there was a systematic effort by the RSF and Arab militia in West Darfur, in the towns we have covered, that was directed at looting civilian infrastructure. This includes main markets in Al Janina, in Tendelti, and in Mestere, which are the three towns we have covered. Not only markets, hospitals in Al Janina, the Al Janina Teaching Hospital was also looted. Civilian homes were also looted. Not only looting, but was also destroyed. The main markets of Al Janina, Mestere, and part of the market in Tendelti were also banned. And there is already evidence out there, including the report issued by Human Rights Watch last week. So those are the types of violations we have seen. In relation to sexual violence against women and girls, we were able to interview one survivor of sexual violence in Adre. But we were informed about other 4 cases of women and girls who were sexually assaulted in Al Janina. I want to emphasize that after our mission, we have received more reports indicating that many more women and girls were either raped or sexually assaulted in West Darfur and other parts of Darfur. So in conclusion, I want to say that Amnesty International was only able to interview one community, that is the Masalit community in East Chad. The reason is probably because most of the people who fled to East Chad are from the Masalit community. I saw a report by the UNHCR indicating that 98% of refugees they registered in East Chad, are from the Masalit community. So that explains why almost all the people we interviewed are from the Masalit community in East Chad. So this presents a research challenge for both Amnesty and all other organizations that are doing documentation of human rights in Sudan. For example, we received reports that the Masalit armed groups were also involved in attacks on Arab communities in densely populated Arab neighborhoods. But we were informed that most of these people fled to eastern Darfur, and they did not come to Adre or to East Chad. And that makes it impossible for organizations who are going to East Chad to interview these communities. Also, because remote research is currently extremely difficult, because there is no telecommunication network and there is no internet, it's also difficult to reach these communities over the phone. So one thing that needs to be focused on is to also seek other alternative ways of reaching these communities. The group that is now controlling, that's RSF and Arab militia, have not been able to allow investigators to go and access those communities. So I just wanted to highlight that. And in conclusion, I will have to say generally for Sudan, in terms of human rights documentation, there are challenges, of course. The challenges I have mentioned, for example, lack of access to certain communities, difficulty in carrying out remote research, and also lack of access to the country generally. But I wanted to highlight that there are certain opportunities that can be explored by organizations and individuals who are doing documentation at the moment. One is, of course, the ability to access communities that were displaced in neighboring countries. And here I'm talking about Chad, Uganda. There are Sudanese who are in Kampala and in other parts of Uganda. A few Sudanese in Kenya, all these wonderful activists who have come to Kenya. Those organizations that are able to go to Egypt, although Amnesty is not able to go to Egypt at the moment, and also South Sudan. So there are those, those opportunities, and of course, open source investigations, and what people call OSNIT these days, which is really an important element of documentation in this digital age. I have to emphasize that it is very difficult to also corroborate some of the findings organizations are making, including the finding of mass graves in Darfur, to corroborate them through satellite imagery, because there is the inability for companies to, to take high resolution satellite imageries. For example, a mass grave we were informed of in Mystery, we were not able to verify through satellite imagery analysis, which is a challenge, that organizations are facing. So I think I will stop there. I don't want to go into recommendations because that is not what I wanted to cover. But looking forward to the questions that participants will ask. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Abdullahi. That was very succinct, very detailed. I saw a lot of pens furiously writing, especially from the international lawyers in the room. So thank you for that. Kholood?
Thank you and good afternoon, everyone. It's very difficult to follow Abdullahi because what he was saying is both very pressing and very harrowing. And I think, those of us here in the room from Sudan are the lucky ones because we are away from the fighting. But of course, we all know people who are under extreme duress right now. I think that we all, the international community has a very short attention span. I think we know that very well. And that attention span is also, can you hear me at the back? Raise the volume or speak slower? Speak slower. Okay, that's okay. No problem. As I was saying, the international community has a very short attention span. And this war's been going on for just over 3 months now, and we've already seen Sudan come off the agenda, both in terms of the media and in terms of diplomatic attention. Now, there are some diplomats that are still working on this, but even they, I have to say, with my respect to those in the room, have not had this sort of level of attention and the level of focus that we would like them to see. There's a lot of frustration in this room, and I think it's warranted. We know that international processes, legal processes particularly, take a long time, but that is no excuse, I think, for the level of, or the lack of level of attention that I think this requires. This war was brought about because of impunity. That is the reason we are where we are. And that impunity, given that there is no legal system in Sudan that can prosecute the perpetrators of these crimes, has to come to some degree, at least for the time being, from the outside. But we haven't seen the level of attention to impunity or indeed any consequences for the perpetrators of violence that we need to see. So the unfortunate thing is that we all now have to exist in a landscape where some of the things we want to see, and judging from the questions from the first panel, that we desperately want to see, won't materialize anytime soon. So for me, the question for today is, how do we do the maximum that we can with what we can, and focus the attention, as Mikel said, focus is a key word, focus the attention on where it needs to be right now, so that in the future, inshallah, when this war comes to a close, We can stop repeating the cycles of conflict, because then we will have stopped repeating the cycles of violence. Obviously, that is a tall order, and I recognize that. But I think we need to chart a course that builds on previous failures, and that includes all of us, not just the Sudanese, but chiefly the international community. So this war has three fronts. I think we know this quite well. There's the sort of the battle for territory and for control. There is the war being fought on the info space, whether that's social media or traditional media. And there's, of course, the sort of the front that is now coalescing around the mediation platforms. And we have to think of all of these fronts being waged simultaneously. And we have to think of them as interrelated. And justice is key to all of those fronts. But there are also two simultaneous wars being fought right now. There's the war that we can all see between the Sudan Armed Forces and the Rapid Support Forces. And there's the war waged by both of them on civicness or civil society, or protesters, actors, documenters, etc. That makes all of our lives very, very difficult. And that's the war that I want to focus on right now. When we think about the numbers of activists, the numbers of human rights monitors, the numbers of lawyers, doctors, journalists that have been detained, that have been killed, that have been persecuted for various means, we can see also very clearly that this didn't just start now, that this has all been going on for several years, but there has been an absolute uptick, and I think we can all feel it, since this war started. So when we think about how to center immunity, sort of accountability in the way we monitor this war, we have to ensure that we are starting from the right points of departure, that some of this has been going on for a long time, but there are new dynamics and new iterations of it, that the war against civicness and civilians is, in some parts of the country, more pronounced than it is than the war between the military war between the Sudan Armed Forces and the Rapid Support Forces, and that if we want to have some kind of lasting peace after this war, it's not enough to just end the war between the Sudan Armed Forces and the Rapid Support Forces. We have to also end the war on civicness. And what that means is that we have to embed accountability into all of the approaches that are being put forward to end the war. Now, some people say, and I've heard this from many people, from university professors, from political elites, from the diplomatic community, that there is no room for justice right now. That now we just need to think about how to stop the belligerents from waging their war. And I think all of us in this room can understand that that's absolutely the wrong way to approach this, because without focusing on accountability, we'll actually just be postponing the war, if it does end, rather than ending it. So my question is then, what can we do now to make sure that when we think about ending this war, when we think about mediations, and this war will likely end in a mediation. There's not been a single war in Sudan's independence history that has been won militarily. All of them have been resolved to some degree through political processes and peace processes. Now, I don't need to tell anybody in this room just how subpar some of those political processes and peace processes have been. In many ways, we are living through the consequence of some of those political processes and peace processes. And so, one thing that's been missing from all of those processes is an actual commitment to accountability and an actual commitment to justice. And we have seen now, I think, in the most devastating way possible, what not including accountability and justice in a meaningful way leads us to. And it's something that we, of course, now having seen just how devastating that can be, will want to avoid this in the future. So, because I don't want to take too long, I want to leave room for questions. We have to do as much as we can right now to document, to ensure that more voices are heard. Michael said earlier that I'm one of the key voices in coming out of Sudan. I don't think that's true. I think there are many, and I think all of them need to be amplified. I think oftentimes Again, with my respect to diplomats, they listen to people who write them short, snappy tweets in English. And we need to frankly be doing a lot more to access Arabic language monitoring. We need to be doing a lot more to access people on the ground. I'm lucky to have left Sudan. Many people aren't, but they're doing amazing work, which is one of them. Bassett is another. And there are many more on the ground. We have to have processes, accountability processes, political processes, monitoring processes that do far more to access those actors than just rely on those of us in the diaspora, no matter how well-meaning or how well-positioned we might be. I think I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Kholood, for those remarks. I think it helps keep things in perspective and focus, especially coming from you. We do have one last intervention, brief intervention. Abdullahi, do you still want to just jump in real quick, and then we're going to open up to questions?
Because of the time, I cannot speak more, but...
Bettina says 2 to 3 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Abdullahi, legal officer, Wayamo Foundation. I just want to speak about, brief 2 points. First point is about the war in Darfur. If you go back and I used to help International Criminal Court before with Mikel and my friend Gudja. If you go back to the same crimes that now Kosheb is in charge, we can find the same crimes that took place now in Darfur is the same crimes that took place in 2002, 2003, and 2004. So that means there is a premeditation element in this crime. The same looting, burning houses, killing people in the base of their ethnic background, in their tribes, and also the same militia, which is now supporting RSF. For me, it's difficult to differentiate between RSF and Arab militia. Both of them are working together, attacking together civilians in the cities. Like, for example, now the situation in Zalingi is very difficult. It's very, there is too many institutions destroyed by the Arab militia, by RSF, too many houses burning, destroyed, too many, rape cases took place also in Morne, and all the bad things that the behavior of Arab militia and Janjaweed. The second point is with regard, I think most of the Sudanese here, they are expecting this war, except international community were naive. I don't know what's the reason, but I will let Kholood to give us your analysis about this. Why the international community, they are not expecting the war, even we are warning them about this war. In these 4 years or 3 years, we know that RSF and the two parts of war are preparing themselves to get into the war. Thank you.
Well, that's already our first question to the panelists. Are there any other questions? All right, we'll take these first questions and then we'll put it to the panelists. Okay, so first.
Thank you, Mike. My question goes to Abdullahi, specifically Amnesty International. Were you able to find out why is the war shifting from Khartoum, why it started to ethnic fighting in Darfur, especially in Genena? And if you're able to know the sub-tribes within the RSF and the Arab militias themselves, because they must belong to some sub-tribes within before they become those coalitions. And why is it becoming, what is the reason of targeting the Masaliti specifically? Is it the land issue? What is the issue? What did you find out as Amnesty?
Very good question. Let's just make sure we get some gender representation here. Go ahead.
شكرا. أنا بتكلم عن إنه في مناطق تانية يعني برضو حصل فيها انتهاكات للمرة الثانية. مثلا بتكلم عن شمال دارفور محلية طويلة اللي هو تم فيه انتهاكات في عام 2003. نفس الانتهاكات الآن تاني طلعوا نزحوا وتم الهجوم عليهم، وكان فيه انتهاكات بتاعة violence against women بصورة كبيرة جدا، حتى وهم راجعين في الطريق إنه ينزحوا من الفاشر من طويلة للفاشر تمت ضربهم للمرة الثانية، وتم اغتصاب بعض النساء. وفي أثناء ما نحن بنوثق يعني لاقتنا حالات يعني تم اغتصابها مرتين. في العام 2003 في حالة إنها عمرها 10 سنين تم اغتصابها في العام 2003 ولحد ما بقت وتم اغتصابها تاني في العام 2023. يعني كانت حاجات مؤسفة جدا. وفي حاجة تانية إنه في اغتصابات تمت بالنسبة للأولاد، ولكن المجتمع يعني ما قادر إنه يطلع الحاجات دي لبرا، لأنه هم طلعوا من طويلة لما جو داخلين الفاشر رجعوا تاني لمعسكرات الإيواء. وفي معسكرات الإيواء ما كان في أي دعم، ما كان في أي يعني ما في حاجة، لأنه كل المنظمات طلعت. حتى نحن في أثناء ما بدينا نوثق ما قدرنا نوثق نكمل التوثيق نسبة لأنه الاستخبارات الجهات الأمنية حتى الأسر. يعني أنا في أسرة وأنا بحقق معاه بتقول لي إنه نحن يعني كنا فرحانين بالجنائية، هديل ناس الجنائية قاعدين برا، نحن ما عايزين نتكلم، نحن ياخد حقنا الله. يعني في انتهاكات كثيرة رفضوا. في زول بيقول لك مثلا أنا فعلا تم انتهاكي لكن ما دار أتكلم لأنه أنا اتكلمت وخلاص. وهديل يعني نفس الناس، يعني في زول بيقول لك نفس الناس أو بيقول لك مثلا يهودا نفس الشخصية اللي كان عمل كده وعمل كده. فالانتهاكات اللي قاعد تحصل بالنسبة للنساء كبيرة جدا، والتوثيق ضعيف شديد، يعني قد يكون معدوم. حتى الناس الموجودين إنهم بيوثقوا بيتعرضوا لانتهاكات. يعني مثلا عندنا نحن ناس زميلتي بتوثق تم اغتصابها يعني.
Thank you very much for that intervention and that very personal account. Go ahead, please.
طيب أنا محمد سلطان بشتغل في فريمورك ميكانيزم منسق إقليم دارفور هيومن رايت ديفندر. طيب بشكل سريع لأنه الزمن في كلام أشاره عبد الله إنه هم قدروا يوثقوا بس مع المجموعات بتاعت المساليد، لأنه برضو زي منطقة تندلتي كان فيها مجموعات تانية زي 80% من الناس نزحوا. في مجموعات تانية زي الزخاوة والتامة والإرنغا وخير وقاعدين في المناطق دي ممكن الناس توثق معهم. وهم هسه حاليا المجموعات دي قاعدة في الحدود في معسكرات زي معسكر قاقا وفرشنة وحجر حديد وديسة وكده. دي المناطق دي في الحدود هناك، لأنه برضو حصلت لهم انتهاكات كثيرة شديد. برضو في محلية تانية الناس ما اشتغلت فيها أي توثيق، ممكن ناس أمنستي في الفترة الجاية يشوفوا الحاجة دي، زي محلية فوربرغا. هي محلية بتقع في غرب دارفور، من أكبر المحليات في غرب دارفور في الحدود مع تشاد. ممكن الطريق ليه عن طريق مناطق بيخادي زي من أبش، ممكن الناس تجي لأنجريمة والمناطق دي، لأنه في هي أصلا حصل فيها انتحاك قبل 15 أبريل. في أكثر من 120 أسرة نزحت في الحدود، مشرت منطقة في تشاد اسمها أندريسة، وفي جزء منهم قاعدين في معسكر تاني اسمه جوز بيضة. ممكن الناس تشتغل في الحاجة دي. الحاجة المهمة إنه هسه حاليا في دارفور في عدد كبير جدا من المدافعين من حقوق الإنسان بيتعرضوا لانتهاكات، وفي جزء منهم اتقتلوا في الجنينة. والحماية اللي قاعد تتم للمدافعين في دارفور هي ما كافية. أي في جهود مبذولة من فرون لاين ومن ديفندر. فبرضه أنا داير أشوف هل أمنستي هي ممكن تقدر تقدم شنو في الجانب ده، لأنه هسه حاليا في مدافعين الخطر عليهم أكبر شديد، لكن ما لاقين جهات ممكن تقدر تقدم لهم حماية. الحاجة الأخيرة برضو إذا كان الناس اللي هم شغالين في أمنستي أو مؤسسات تانية ما قادرين يمشوا المناطق دي ويكون في توثيق، ممكن يتم التواصل. اوريدي في مدافعين قاعدين في مناطق لسه فيها شبكة ولسه فيها شبكة بتاع التواصل، زي مثلا نيالا، زي الفاشر ستيل لسه فيها زي الضيعين وخيره. شكرا.
Thank you very much. Now we're just going to take two more questions on this round, and then we're going to get to some of the responses. Philip and Mahasin. So Philip, go ahead.
Thanks a lot. I'm Philip Ambach from the ICC. I had two questions. I think they mostly go to Abdullah, but I think also others that spoke to the specific incidents. The first one is on the attacks on civilians by RSF elements and related Arab militia in different places. You talked about 3 different towns. Did you see that there is sort of a commonality? Does this look like a common strategy? Does this look like somebody is having a policy that would express itself in similar attacks in different places, not just by coincidence, but by design? That was one question. And the other question goes to the targeting of the Masalit. And again, many of you spoke to this. And my question here is, in your opinion, is that targeting one that is relating to this community occupying the lands? So I want to just get rid of these people from the lands, or is this a specific targeting of a tribe or other congregation as the Masalit? We're targeting the Masalit and not the people occupying our lands. Thank you.
Thank you. Last question before we open or we get our responses from the experts. Go ahead, Mahasin.
السلام عليكم. أنا محاسن ذهب نيمونيك الأرشيف السوداني. عندي سؤال لعبد الله. السؤال بيتعلق ب الآلية اللي بتشتغل بها أمنستي لجمع المعلومات. هل نحن حنكون عندنا تقارير واضح فيها هي الآلية شنو؟ كيف حصل الفيريفيكيشن للمعلومات دي؟ وما إلى ذلك، لأنه دي حاجة مهمة برضو. وبرضو عاوز أسأل من شكل التعامل في تبادل المعلومات برضو مع الضحايا أو الناجين من الحرب. الجايد لاينز اللي اتبعتوها شنو، وكيف نحن كلنا ممكن نتعلم من الموضوع ده. السؤال الثاني لخلود. بنتكلم عن سودان ما بعد حرب، وسودان فيه طاولة بتاعة تفاوض. كيف بتفتكري إنه حيكون عندنا سلام بيمثل كل السودانيين بكل الأطياف حقتهم إذا تم بنفس الطريقة بتاعة جوبا؟ حتقولي شنو للإنترناشنال كوميونيتي اللي بيتعامل مع المشكلة السودانية كأنها مشكلة تاريخية، في حين إنه الدولة السودانية ذاتها اختلفت تماماً من بعد انفصال الجنوب. فبس those are my 2 questions. Thank you.
I think there's still a lot of hands. I do want to get some responses, and then if we still have some time, we'll open it up again. Okay? Everyone's going to be here for a couple of days as well, so you can pin them down for coffee. Abdullahi, you want to start, or yeah?
Thank you all for these very good questions. I will start with the question from Ali. Why is the war shifting? Why is the war shifting from Khartoum to West Darfur, and what is the reason? So basically, Amnesty International documents human rights violations, and in this context of the conflict in Sudan, international humanitarian law violations. Of course, in terms of the analysis of why the conflict erupted in West Darfur, I will say different people have different opinions. For example, I will start with the RSF. The RSF says they think elements of within the Sudanese army are trying to shift the focus from the defeats they are suffering in Khartoum to West Darfur, so that people are focused on West Darfur and they are arming local tribes there. That is what the RSF is, for example, is saying that we know of. If you speak to the Masalit community itself, because we spoke to hundreds of Masalit community members in East Chad, they will tell you there was tension existing already between the Masalit and other communities, and particularly the Arab community and the RSF in general, that is supporting them. It is about land resources, it's about agriculture, it's about the ability to govern West Darfur. So all these are the points the community, the Masalit community was raising. They were saying the Arabs want to dislodge us from our land. They want to take over our farms. They want to take over our resources. And that is why they are targeting us. That is what the Masalit community will say. Of course, I said we have not heard from the Arab side, Arab community side of the story. So it will be interesting to also hear what they will say. So I will respond to your question that way. I don't want to give my own assessment or Amnesty assessment why the situation here, but we know this conflict has been there before, and we know from the past 20 years a lot of atrocities have been committed, sponsored by the Sudan government, which was using both the RSF and the SAF to commit violations in Darfur, and particularly in West Darfur, and that's why we have the ICC cases ongoing. So it's not something new, actually. The context and the background of the conflict is already there. I completely sympathize with my sister, and apart from the sexual violence cases that we documented in East Chad, we have also documented sexual violence cases in Khartoum and in Yala. So the sexual violence cases are widespread, not only in West Darfur, but also in Khartoum and in other places of the country. In our report, we are going to cover comprehensively what we were able to gather regarding sexual violence against women and girls, but I will not be able to go into all the specifics now. On other communities who are impacted by the war, for example, the Tama community, the Zakawa. So before we went to East Chad, what we were hearing was there was the attacking. There was the RSF and Arab militia that was attacking and targeting non-Arab communities, basically the African communities in West Darfur. That is all we were hearing. But from our research, I said we interviewed 99% of the people we interviewed were of the Masalit community. We interviewed them in 4 different camps, in Adre, in Kufrun, in Farshana, and in Gaga. I had my colleague mentioned Gaga as a place where people from the Tama and Zakawa will have been, but we have been there, and we were not able to interview those communities. But it's possible that other communities like the Zakawa and the Tama and the Four and others were also impacted. What I just described is what Amnesty International was able to establish, and what we were able to establish is that 99% of the cases of people killed and injured that we managed to document in our report were from the Masalit community. So it will be interesting. And I also mentioned that the UNHCR said 98% of people who are registered in East Chad were from the Masalit community. So it will be really interesting to understand, one, where the other communities who are not Masalit are, and whether most of them or some of them are still staying in West Darfur, or whether they fled to other parts that other than Chad. So that is how I will respond to that. In relation to what Amnesty International is doing in relation to protection of human rights defenders, so Amnesty International is responding into this conflict using different lenses. One of them is the protection of civilian lens, which is why we are documenting the violations. Two is putting the spotlight on protection of refugees and individuals fleeing from the conflict. Three is support and protection of human rights defenders from Sudan. I would like to mention that Amnesty has been able to support human rights defenders who were living West Darfur or even other parts of Sudan. And if there are individuals that you know of who are in need of evacuation from Sudan to safer places that they are able to identify, please let us know, and we are able to support them. Both with travel arrangements and with with living expenses. I'm happy to say that I already see a few faces of individuals Amnesty International have supported here in this room today. In relation to the ICC question, whether RSF and Arab are coordinating the attacks, and two, whether there is a policy of them attacking particular specific groups like the Basalit and others, I will say it is very difficult to answer that question based on the research we have done. I would like to refer you to what the RSF said in particular in response to Human Rights Watch report on Mystery. They publicly said that they are not allied to any militia in West Darfur. So that's what the RSF is saying. But from our research, we were able to document that RSF and Arab militia are coordinating attacks, and they are carrying out attacks together. People we interviewed are able to identify RSF members, and they are able to identify Arab militia members by how they look like, by the dress they are wearing and the uniforms they are wearing, and also based on their interaction with them before. So it's clear in their mind who is attacking these communities. There is also evidence, video evidence that can be seen through open source research that shows, for example, Arab militia operating with RSF, especially in relation to attacks against people who are fleeing to Chad. So it's easy to know that. The only thing that we were not able to understand or conclude is whether the RSF, the control and command of the RSF over the Arab militias, that we are not able to identify, and I think that will need more research. On how Amnesty International is able to do research. So we usually mostly do two types of research. One is remote research, and two is in-person field research, like the one we did in Chad, where we interview communities who have suffered violations one-on-one. For example, as I said, we interviewed hundreds of people who are injured, or whose relatives were killed or injured, or whose houses and property were destroyed in Chad, face to face. So that is how we were able to collect evidence from these individuals. And remote research is also possible when we are able to reach people over the phone, either through secure apps like WhatsApp, Signal, and others. So we are able to interview people that way, especially when the connection is good. But as I said in my previous remarks, it is difficult in Sudan now to do remote research. It's extremely challenging. But in our current research, we were able to use to do remote research and communicate with people in Khartoum, in Yala, in West Darfur, and other places. So it is still possible, but it's very tedious. On guidelines we use, so there are common guidelines, of course, in relation to interviewing victims and survivors of violence, including getting informed consent from them to be able to interview them, ensuring the confidentiality of the information they share, and also ensuring that Amnesty or any other organization that is interviewing people is not causing more harm. And this can be explained in different ways. For example, there are specific guidelines relating to interviewing children. There are specific guidelines with respect to interviewing women and girls who are subjected to sexual violence. So there are different guidelines that we use. I'm happy to discuss with you separately when you have time. So I think those were the questions directed at me. If I forgot one, please remind me. Thanks.
Okay, I'll be quick because I know we don't have much time. Apologies to the translators. Okay, so there are a few questions. Bassett, you ask why the international community didn't see this coming. That's the question, isn't it? Because, as you say, most of us in Sudan did. And I think if people could trace what the consequences of decades of impunity and even the last 5 years worth of impunity were, they can track that militarily, at least, the belligerents saw that they could, to some degree, wage a war right in the middle of the country, right in the capital. And because they got away with it before, potentially they can get away with it again. The sort of the costs for waging this war were lessened by the fact that there was no accountability before. But there was a very real belief within the international community that an agreement would be signed. Now, the reason for that, I think, is because diplomats were talking to people who had an interest in that agreement being signed, and no one else. And so, even though whomever you spoke to, the grocer, the man who brings, the milk around, to university professors, to resistance committees, whomever you spoke to could see this coming, but they weren't necessarily the people that the international community was speaking to. And that is a big mistake. Now, we're seeing that exact same dynamic play out now in mediations, for example, and in the international response writ large when it comes to this war. The international community is still relying on the same voices, the same elites, the same actors who have very narrow interests to guide them through their response, which is why we're seeing ceasefire after ceasefire not being adhered to, which is why we're seeing very low-level diplomatic engagement on this. I think there is an element of also, because Sudan has had so many wars, and because it had so many, ongoing conflicts, that Sudan is just one of these problem countries, that it will just continue to have conflicts, it will continue to have wars. Now, that obviously completely ignores the fact that, particularly in the last few years, Sudan has had sort of a wellspring of anti-war, anti-autocracy, anti-military engagement that has been independent, robust, and sustained. And I think the fact that this movement tends to be largely ignored is what leads diplomats to make very reductive analyses and decisions around Sudan. So I'm hoping that at some point this cycle will break, but frankly, I don't have as much hope. Hassan's question, how do we avoid making the mistakes in mediations? Now, when I say that mediation is likely where this will end or will be resolved, that may or may not be a good thing, because as we see, the fighting in West Darfur, partly it's as a result of the Juba Peace Agreement, because in the Juba Peace Agreement, some groups got some level of rights and some groups didn't. And so, Herr Ambach, your question, you know, part of it is there's a settling of old scores that is going on in West Darfur. These Arab groups they're pastoralists, they don't have land, so it's not their land that they are clearing. It is land that they think that they are owed access to. But the Juba Peace Agreement did not give them access to those resources because they fought on the side of the government, and the government already had its own dispensation that it got in the Juba Peace Agreement. And so how, focusing on exactly what went wrong before, how power sharing and wealth sharing, which are always at the center of all the peace and political agreements in Sudan, are always done based on who has a gun and therefore can come to the table, are always done on the basis of who can we legibly read as a state. And so non-state actors, like, for example, resistance committees and unions, they become illegible to mediators. They become illegible to state actors like the UN and the AU and IGAD. So these are the kinds of mistakes that we need to correct. Now, again, I don't have much hope that there will be a sea change, a very big change in the way that these mediations are run, frankly, because we're seeing the same attitudes, the same approaches, the same behaviors from the international community that we have seen forever. But I think that doesn't mean we have to stop pushing for it, right? And that's the frustration of being in the position that many of us find ourselves in, that we are often speaking to brick walls. But I'm hoping through some attrition, we can at least ensure that some of the right voices are engaged. We try. I think those are all the questions. Thank you.
النزاع الحالي في السودان يختلف في أسبابه وفي جذوره وفي العناصر الفاعلة فيما حدث في دارفور سنة 2003. ما يحدث اليوم في دارفور أكيد مهم جدا ويظهر الطابع أو العنصر القبلي والإثني للنزاع، لكن هذا لا يمكن أن ينسينا ما يحدث في مناطق أخرى مثل كردفان، مثل النيل الأزرق، مثل الخرطوم بعناصرها الثلاثة أم درمان وبحري وفي مناطق أخرى. الوضع يختلف لأنه لو ننسى أسباب ومجريات الحرب الحالية ونرجع لما حدث في دارفور الآن 20 سنة، يعني the message will be very different to the international community. This is a different conflict and it has to be treated as such. شكرا.
Thank you very much. And please, as I said before, I'm sure there are more questions. Is this on? Yes. But we have now our coffee or our lunch break, and please continue the conversation.